Hello, Mr. Harrigan. I just want to say, I miss you. Welcome back to another edition of Drotalks Audiobooks. Dro here. Today I'm going to be talking about the first story in a compilation of stories from Stephen King from the book titled If It Bleeds. The first story in this chapter, and the video will be dedicated only to this one particular story, is Mr. Harrigan's Phone. If It Bleeds was published in April of 2020 and was written by Stephen King, the master, and this particular story was narrated by Will Patton. Before we begin, make sure you reach across the grave, hit that like button, become an audiobook zombie, and subscribe for more audiobook content. This story takes place in a rural town of Maine between 2006 and 2007, and we can derive this because the story is based upon the release date of the first generation iPhone. So even though the date was never specifically addressed, we do know it takes place around this time period. There are two main characters in this story. The first one is a boy we meet when he's 9 years old by the name of Craig. He's both a dynamic character as we get to grow up with him and see him, overcome several obstacles, both internal and external. But he's also the antagonist that we follow throughout this entire story. And he is a great character. Seeing the world through his perspective really gives this story a distinction from a lot of Stephen King stories, being that we're growing up with this young kid. In such a short sample, the world is completely fleshed out. And we really, at least I really felt like I was there and experiencing kind of a fast forward of coming of age story with a supernatural twist. Our second main character is Mr. Harrigan, who's an introverted billionaire, was famous for, we can derive that he made his fortunes in the stock market. He was ruthless, and now he just wants to retire a quiet life, even though he still tries to keep a foot in what's going on in the financial world. He still has investments and he is still active somewhat, but he is definitely not the ruthless businessman that he was when he was in his prime. And his relationship with Craig is that of a boss-worker type relationship. You see, Craig reads for Mr. Harrigan and is a fascinating character. He is both dynamic because in this relationship with Craig, we actually see Mr. Harrigan kind of evolve. He has his own personal arc, but he's also the antagonist. Light spoilers, Mr. Harrigan dies. He dies pretty, I don't want to say early in the story, because there's a lot of development given to him, but you pretty much see the fact that he's going to die from the opening scene. I mean, it's by no means no surprise. That's why I said it's a light spoiler. Being that it's a Stephen King book, this next part is also no surprise. He has a supernatural relationship with Craig from beyond the grave. What's dead may never die. Harrigan is also one of the antagonists of the story, but not in the way you would think. There's a lot of twists and turns here. Some of them are very obvious. This is a very short story, but just because it's obvious does not mean that's not enjoyable. But definitely these two characters make this story A+ in my books, and just for that alone, it is definitely worth checking out. So as I mentioned, Craig starts the story as a 9-year-old boy that's working for Mr. Harrigan, reading him books, doing some light housework, and we really get to enjoy this character. He's just like you would imagine most 9-year-old children at that age. I personally have 9-year-old children at this point in time, and he reminded me a lot of my own kids. His main obsession is he wants this new iPhone that's just been released, and he asks his dad for it continuously. He has a very good work ethic. He's advanced in reading for his years, and this is actually how he got the job after reading a verse in a church that Mr. Harrigan attended. And he enjoys reading to Mr. Harrigan, and they build this type of grandfather-grandson type relationship where Mr. Harrigan does impart certain bits of wisdom And this 9-year-old boy is he's a sponge absorbing all of it. He's both afraid of Mr. Harrigan, admires him, and is intrigued by him. And it's a very fascinating relationship that the two of them share. Also, the relationship between him and his father is also fantastic. The tension in the story starts to increase as Mr. Harrigan to give cards on 4 occasions of the year: Valentine's Day, his birthday, Thanksgiving, and for Christmas. And then each of these cards is a $1 scratcher ticket. But eventually, Craig wins $3,000. Out of gratitude, he buys Mr. Harrigan a phone. This is a critical tipping point in the story because Mr. Harrigan does not want the phone. He's not materialistic. He's a man who likes to think, and he does not like to be distracted by any sort of items. He don't have a TV, he don't have a radio, and he's just a very simple man with a lot of money. But he turns the phone down, but when he sees what the phone can do in terms of instant information via the internet, which is basically any computer, any laptop, but it's just in the palm of his hands, and he can make calls, make business transactions, everything, he decides to keep the phone, and he really enjoys it. And Craig is very happy that his gift, out of gratitude from winning these $3,000 due to that scratcher that Mr. Harrigan bought him, was received so well, because both him, his father, and Mr. Harrigan all thought that was not going to work. This is where the supernatural really vamps up. After Mr. Harrigan passes on to the next world, there's this link between Craig and Mr. Harrigan, and the connection is made via the iPhone. This leads to fantastical elements within the plot and a decision that needs to be made. Main character Craig, who's now a college student, and it ends in a fantastic manner. This is a wonderful short story, and the narration by Will Patton is just a cherry on top. This one I think is a must listen. Stephen King is very keen on his short stories. I'm a big fan of all his compilations that he releases, because although there are a couple ones that are the majority of them are fantastic, and this one is no exception. So have you listened to If It Bleeds, specifically Mr. Harrigan's phone? If so, what did you think about it? Was it the best one in the whole compilation of If It Bleeds? So, as always, this has been Drotalks. Thank you for listening. Don't forget that like and subscribe. Ring that bell to get notified. And we'll see you next time.